A tale of loss and return, the mystery of the missing couple on their anniversary. A couple ventured deep into the Michigan wilderness for a hunting trip, their hearts full of anticipation. But Dean and Joseline Spence never returned, vanishing without a trace into the vast, untamed forest. 2 years later, their dog Rufus appeared on a familiar porch, emaciated, injured, and carrying a secret that would unravel an unthinkable nightmare, setting off a chain of events that would shake a family to its core. Elizabeth Spence, 72, pushed herself up from her knees, wincing as her arthritic joints protested the effort. The Michigan sun beat down on her weathered hands as she yanked another weed from her tomato patch. Each year, the garden work grew harder, but Elizabeth was stubborn. She'd be damned if she'd let the weeds win after decades of tending this earth. "Just a few more," she muttered, eyeing the row of vegetables still demanding her care. The insistent beeping of a kitchen timer broke her focus, reminding her of the pot roast simmering on the stove. With a grunt, she stood, one hand pressed against her aching lower back. The walk to the house felt longer than it used to, each step up the wooden porch stairs sending a twinge through her knees. She'd been putting off the gardening for weeks, but with her son Neil busy at his job in Detroit and Dean, she stopped that thought cold. 2 years. 2 years since Dean, her eldest son, and his wife, Joseline, had gone hunting and disappeared. Elizabeth reached for the screen door handle, her mind already on the carrots she needed to add to the roast. Then movement caught her eye. She turned, expecting a raccoon or a stray cat. The trowel slipped from her fingers, clattering to the porch. There, sprawled on the worn wooden boards, was a dog. Not just any dog. Even through the matted, filthy fur and the shocking thinness of his frame, she knew him instantly. Rufus, Dean's Irish wolfhound. Elizabeth stumbled back, her hand clutching her chest where her heart pounded wildly. "No," she whispered, blinking hard. "No, it can't be." The dog lifted his head weakly at her voice. One front leg was wrapped in a crude, stained bandage. His ribs jutted starkly through his coat, and a raw, infected wound marred his forehead. But those eyes, those gentle brown eyes that had always gazed at Dean with unwavering devotion, were unmistakably Rufus's. "Oh my God," Elizabeth gasped, her legs threatening to buckle. She gripped the porch railing, unable to tear her eyes from the impossible sight. 2 years. Rufus had been missing for 2 years, along with Dean and Joseline. Search parties had scoured the Michigan woods and found nothing, no bodies, no gear, no trace of them or their dog. With shaking hands, she fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it twice before dialing 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator asked. "This is Elizabeth Spence," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I need officers at my house immediately. The dog, my son's dog, just showed up. My son who's been missing for 2 years." "Man, can you repeat that?" "Dean Spence's dog," Elizabeth said, her voice steadier but still trembling. "My son is D. Agent Dean Spence. He went missing 2 years ago with his wife, Joseline, while hunting. Their dog just appeared on my porch. He's injured badly. Please send someone now." "Units are on their way, Mrs. Spence. Are you safe?" "Is anyone else there?" "Just me and the dog. He can barely move." "Oh God, what does this mean? Where's my son?" "Stay on the line, ma'am. Officers will be there shortly." Elizabeth sank onto the porch steps, her eyes locked on Rufus. The dog's tail gave a weak thump against the boards, as if he recognized her too. She wanted to comfort him, but her legs wouldn't move. All she could do was stare and whisper, "Where's Dean, boy? Where's my son?" Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars screeched into her driveway. "Officers Morrison and Bradley," one announced. Elizabeth recognized them both. They'd been part of the initial search when Dean vanished. "Mrs. Spence," Officer Morrison said gently, approaching slowly. His eyes widened when he saw the dog. Jesus, is that really? It's Rufus, Elizabeth confirmed, tears streaming down her face. It's Dean's dog. Officer Bradley was already on his radio, calling for additional units and a veterinarian. Morrison knelt beside Rufus, careful not to startle him. Hey there, boy, you've had a rough time, haven't you? He looked up at Elizabeth. We need to get him medical attention immediately, and we'll need to take you to the station, Mrs. Spence. The detectives will want to speak with you right away. But what about searching? Elizabeth pressed. If Rufus is alive, maybe. Dean, we'll handle everything, Morrison assured her. Let's focus on getting you and the dog somewhere safe first. More vehicles arrived: an animal control van with a veterinarian, 2 additional patrol cars, and an unmarked detective sedan. Elizabeth watched in a daze as the vet, a young woman with gentle hands, examined Rufus where he lay. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, the vet murmured. This wound on his head is infected. The leg? Someone tried to bandage it, but it's been a while. We need to get him to the clinic immediately. They loaded Rufus onto a special stretcher, the dog whimpering softly, too weak to resist. Elizabeth found herself in the back of Officer Morrison's patrol car, heading to the station. Her mind raced. How had Rufus survived 2 years in the wilderness? Who had bandaged his leg? And most importantly, what had happened to Dean and Joseline? The police station came into view, familiar yet surreal, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. Officers held doors for her, guiding her to a comfortable interview room, not the stark interrogation rooms of TV dramas, but a softer space with padded chairs and a coffee maker in the corner. Mrs. Spence, I'm Detective Walsh, a woman in her 40s introduced herself. I know this must be overwhelming. Can I get you some water? Coffee? Where's the dog? Elizabeth asked. I need to know he's being taken care of. Dr. Hernandez from the emergency veterinary clinic is with him now, Walsh said. She update us soon. Right now I need you to tell me exactly what happened. More people filed in, detectives from Dean's DEA department, uniformed. Officers who'd known her son. The small room grew crowded with concerned faces. Elizabeth recounted finding Rufus, her voice steadying as she spoke. The detectives took notes, asking careful questions. When had she last seen the dog? What was his condition then? Had she noticed anything unusual around her property lately? The bandage on his leg, Detective Walsh said thoughtfully. That's not something a dog could do himself. Someone helped him. Then someone's seen him, Elizabeth said urgently. Someone knows something. We're already mobilizing search teams, another detective assured her. We'll start from your property and work outward, following any trail the dog might have left. Dr. Hernandez arrived, still in her scrubs. He's stable, she announced, and Elizabeth sagged with relief. Sedated for now while we treat his wounds and run tests. He's been through hell, sorry for the language, but he's a fighter. Someone definitely provided medical care at some point, though not recently. That bandage is at least a few weeks old. When can I see him? Elizabeth asked. Let's give him a few hours to rest, the vet replied. I'll bring him to you as soon as he's ready. She paused. Mrs. Spence, that's one tough dog. Whatever happened out there, he fought to make it back. Elizabeth nodded, fresh tears spilling over. Rufus had made it back, but where was her son? The interview room grew warm with so many people packed inside. Elizabeth sat at the center, answering the detective's questions as word spread through the department. Dean Spence's dog had returned after 2 years. Mrs. Spence, think carefully, Detective Walsh pressed gently. In the days before Dean and Joseline went hunting, did he mention anything unusual? Any concerns about his work, threats he'd received? Elizabeth shook her head. Nothing. He was excited about the trip. They'd been planning it for months, their anniversary. Hunting trip. He said the woods up north were perfect for deer this time of year. The door opened, and 3 more officers entered, including Lieutenant Marcus Hayes from the D. Elizabeth recognized him from department functions she'd attended with Dean. "Elizabeth," Hayes said, his face grave, "I'm sorry you're going through this. We're going to do everything we can to find answers." He turned to the others. "I've got our tech team pulling all of Dean's case files from the 2 months before he disappeared. If someone targeted him, there might be a connection." Another officer, one Elizabeth didn't know, stepped forward. He was younger, maybe mid-30s, with sharp blue eyes and close-cropped sandy hair. "Mrs. Spence, I'm Officer Dmitry Volkov. I worked a few joint operations with Dean. He's a good man." The conversation continued, theories flying back and forth. Elizabeth's head began to pound. She'd been at the station for over 3 hours, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the initial shock was fading. Her arthritis flared, her joints stiffening from sitting too long. "I think Mrs. Spence has had enough for now," Officer Volkov said suddenly, noticing her discomfort. "Perhaps someone should take her home. She needs rest, and we need to coordinate the search teams anyway." Detective Walsh nodded. "He's right, Elizabeth. We'll keep working here. Is there someone we can call to stay with you?" "My other son, Neil, but he's at work in Detroit," Elizabeth said. "It'll take him a few hours to get here." "I can drive you home," Officer Volkov offered. "Make sure you're settled safely. This has been a tremendous shock." Elizabeth accepted gratefully. Her car was still at home, and she wasn't sure she could manage the drive with her hands trembling. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Hernandez called with an update. "Rufus is stable but still sedated. I want to monitor him for a few more hours. Would it be all right if I brought him to your home this evening? I'd like to check his response when he wakes up fully, see how he does in familiar surroundings." "Yes, please," Elizabeth said immediately. "He should be home." The drive back felt surreal. Officer Volkov kept up a gentle stream of conversation, asking about her garden and her years in the community. He seemed genuinely kind, helping her from the car when they arrived, ensuring she had her keys. "The search teams will be working through the night," he assured her as they walked to her door. "Every available officer is being called in. We'll find answers, Mrs. Spence." Inside, Elizabeth sank into her favorite armchair, the one where she'd watched Dean and Neil play as boys. Officer Volkov checked the windows and back door, ensuring everything was secure. "Would you like me to wait until your son arrives?" he offered. "No, you've been very kind," Elizabeth said. "I'll be fine." She paused. "Officer Volkov, do you really think? Could Dean still be alive?" Something flickered across his face. Concern. Sympathy? It vanished too quickly. To identify. "If anyone could survive out there, it'd be Dean," he said. He knew those woods better than most. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted them. Elizabeth looked out to see Neil's pickup truck pulling in fast gravel spraying. Her younger son was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped, rushing toward the house. "Mom!" Neil burst through the door, wrapping her in a careful hug. At 38, he was the opposite of his older brother in many ways. Where Dean was calculated and methodical, Neil was impulsive and emotional. "I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner. Traffic was a nightmare, and my boss was being a complete." He noticed Officer Volkov and stopped. "Sorry, I'm Neil Spence." "Officer Dmitry Volkov," the officer said, shaking his hand. "I was just making sure your mother got home safely." "Is it true?" Neil asked. "Rufus really came back?" "He's at the vet clinic," Elizabeth explained. "Dr. Hernandez will bring him home soon. He's in bad shape, but alive." Neil ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his late father's that Elizabeth's heart clenched. "Jesus, 2 years. How is that even possible?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Officer Volkov said. "I should Get back to the station. Help coordinate the search efforts. He turned to Elizabeth. You have my card. Call if you need anything or remember any details that might help. Thank you for driving me home, Elizabeth said. You've been very kind. Volkov was stepping off the porch when another vehicle pulled into the driveway. A van with emergency veterinary services emblazoned on the side. Dr. Hernandez climbed out. Perfect timing, she called. He's starting to wake up. I'll need help getting him inside. Officer Volkov turned back. I'll help. They opened the van's rear doors, revealing Rufus on a cushioned stretcher. The dog's eyes were open but glazed from sedation. His head lifted slightly at the sound of voices. Easy, boy, Dr. Hernandez soothed. Let's get you. The transformation was instantaneous. The moment Rufus's gaze landed on Officer Volkov, the dog erupted into motion. Despite his weakened state and the sedation, he lunged upward, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. His lips pulled back, baring teeth, and he barked with a ferocity that made everyone step back. Whoa! Neil exclaimed, moving protectively in front of his mother. Rufus continued to bark and snarl, his focus locked on Officer Volkov, who had retreated several steps, hands raised. It's okay, Volkov said, though Elizabeth noticed he'd gone pale. I probably smell like my canine unit. Duke was in my patrol car all morning. Dogs can be territorial about that. But Rufus wasn't backing down. Despite Dr. Hernandez's attempts to calm him, he continued to growl, hackles raised, eyes never leaving the officer. Maybe you should go, Neil suggested. We can handle it from here. Volkov nodded, attempting a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, probably best. Duke's a German shepherd, very different energy from a wolfhound. Rufus probably thinks I'm bringing competition into his territory. He backed toward his patrol car. I'll, check in tomorrow, make sure everything's okay. Only. After the patrol car pulled away, did Rufus calm, though he kept glancing toward the road, a low rumble still in his throat. That was strange, Dr. Hernandez mused. In my experience, dogs don't usually react that strongly to just a scent, especially not in Rufus's condition. Well, let's get him inside. He needs rest, and I want to monitor him for a few more hours. Mrs. Spence, do you still have his bed? Familiar items will help. Everything's just as they left it, Elizabeth said softly. I couldn't bear to change anything. As they carefully carried Rufus into the house, Elizabeth couldn't shake the image of the dog's reaction. To Officer Volkov. In all the years Rufus had been part of their family, she'd never seen him act so aggressively toward anyone. Dr. Hernandez left an hour later, satisfied that Rufus was stable enough to stay in Elizabeth's care. The dog now lay on his old bed in the corner of the living room, the same spot where he'd always kept watch when Dean and Joseline visited. His breathing was steady but labored, ribs visible with each rise and fall. Neil sat across from his mother at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them. The familiar ritual of sharing coffee felt strange under these circumstances, the table heavy with unspoken fears, the same table where they'd shared countless family meals. He loved that dog more than anything, Neil said quietly, watching Rufus sleep. Remember when he first brought him home? Joseline was so mad. You didn't tell me he'd be the size of a small horse. Elizabeth managed a weak smile. But she fell in love with him just as fast. Used to sneak him treats when she thought Dean wasn't looking. Dean always knew, Neil added. He'd pretend he didn't see. They lapsed into silence. Elizabeth's arthritis was worse than usual, the stress making her joints feel like they were full of ground glass. She rubbed her swollen knuckles absently. Mom, that reaction to the officer earlier. Neil started. I know, it was strange. Elizabeth said. Dean always said Rufus could read people better than any person could. Remember that time with the contractor who tried to overcharge them for the deck repair? Rufus wouldn't let the guy in the house. And Dean was right. Not to trust him, Elizabeth recalled. Found out later he'd been scamming elderly homeowners all over the county. The phone rang, startling them both. Elizabeth's heart jumped. Every call now carried the weight of possibility. She answered with trembling fingers. "Mrs. Spence, this is Detective Walsh. I wanted to give you an update on our search efforts." Elizabeth put the phone on speaker so Neil could hear. "Yes, we've had teams in the forest since this afternoon," Walsh said, her voice carefully. "Neutral. We were able to locate what we believe are Rufus's tracks leading from the deeper woods toward populated areas. The canine units followed the trail for several miles." Neil leaned forward. "And?" "The trail is old, Mrs. Spence," Walsh continued. "Days, maybe weeks. It meanders significantly, the pattern you'd expect from an animal foraging, hunting, surviving on its own. We lost it at several stream crossings." "But someone bandaged his leg," Elizabeth protested. "Someone helped him." "Yes, that's unusual," Walsh admitted. "We're exploring the possibility that a hunter or hiker came across him and provided basic first aid. But honestly, Mrs. Spence, that bandage is crude. It could have been there for quite some time. In this wilderness, it's not uncommon for people to help injured animals they come across without reporting it." "What are you saying?" Neil's voice had an edge. Walsh sighed audibly. "Based on what we're seeing, the dog's condition, the meandering trail, the time frame, our working theory is that Rufus has been surviving in the wilderness for the past 2 years. Dogs are remarkably adaptable, especially a breed as hardy as an Irish wolfhound. He would have been able to hunt small game, find water sources. You think my son is dead?" Elizabeth's words were flat, not a question, "Mrs. Spence. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but 2 years in those woods with no confirmed sightings, no evidence of camps or shelters beyond what we found in the initial searches. The most likely scenario is that Dean and Joseline encountered some kind of accident, a fall perhaps, or wildlife. The dog survived because, well, he's a dog. They're built for survival in ways humans aren't." "That's," Neil snapped. "My brother was D," Neil interrupted. "He was trained for survival situations. He knew those woods like the back of his hand." "I understand your frustration." "No, you don't," Neil cut in. "You're writing them off based on a few hours of searching and some dog tracks." "Mr. Spence, we're not writing anyone off," Walsh said. "The search will continue. We'll have teams out there for days, maybe weeks. We'll search every cave, every ravine, every possible shelter. But I wanted to be honest about what we're finding so far." Elizabeth closed her eyes. "Thank you for the update, Detective. We'll call immediately if anything changes. Try to get some rest," Walsh said after she hung up. Neil slammed his fist on the table. "They're giving up already, just like 2 years ago." "They searched for months back then," Elizabeth reminded him gently. "Not good enough." Neil said, "Dean wouldn't just die out there. And even if something happened, there'd be evidence. Bodies don't just disappear. Animals." Elizabeth couldn't finish the sentence. "No," Neil said, standing abruptly. "I don't accept that. Look at Rufus. He made it back. He found his way home after 2 years. That dog wouldn't leave Dean unless—" He paused, his anger deflating slightly. "Unless he had no choice." They both looked at the sleeping dog. Even in rest, Rufus bore scars of his ordeal, new scars. A chunk missing from one ear, the raw wound on his head still angry despite treatment. "What happened out there, boy?" Elizabeth whispered. "Where's my son?" Rufus's eyes opened slightly at her voice, his tail giving a single weak thump before he drifted back to sleep. "The bandage means someone helped him," Neil said firmly. "Someone, somewhere, knows something. The police just need to look harder." "Accidents happen, Neil," Elizabeth said. "Even to experienced people. Remember that park ranger last year who—" "Don't," Neil snapped, spinning to face her. "Don't compare Dean to some random hiker. He knew those woods better than anyone. He'd been hunting there since he was 12, and he'd never, ever put Joseline in danger. "I know that," Elizabeth said. "Do you? Because you're sitting there listening to that detective's theories like they mean something. Like Dean and Joseline just, what? Fell off a cliff? Got eaten by bears with no trace?" Elizabeth flinched at the harsh images. The search teams gave up after 3 months, just like they're giving up now," Neil said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "They see Rufus and think, oh, the dog survived in the wild for 2 years. The humans must be dead. But what about the bandage, Mom? What about the fact that Rufus made it home at all? He wouldn't leave Dean unless something forced him to. Or unless Dean told him to," Elizabeth said quietly. That stopped Neil mid-pace. They both looked at Rufus, still sleeping fitfully. "You think Dean sent him for help?" Neil's voice softened. "I don't know what to think anymore," Elizabeth said, her shoulders sagging. "I want to believe they're alive. God knows I do, but 2 years, Neil. No ransom demands, no bodies, no camps, no signs. Maybe the police are right. Maybe something terrible happened, and Rufus was the only survivor." "No," Neil said, his jaw set in a way that painfully reminded Elizabeth of her late husband. "I'm not accepting that. Not without proof." He strode toward the hallway leading to the garage. Elizabeth heard him rummaging, metal clanking against metal. "What are you doing?" she called. Neil emerged, carrying his hunting rifle and Dean's old camping pack. "What I should have done better 2 years ago. I'm going back out there. Neil, it's getting dark." "No, I've got lights and camping gear," he said, checking the rifle and loading ammunition into his pockets. "I searched for weeks after they disappeared, but maybe I missed something. Maybe things have changed. If Rufus found his way back now, after all this time, something made that happen." "The police are searching," Elizabeth said. "The police are going through the motions," Neil countered. "They've already decided Dean and Joseline are dead." He pulled out a tent, sleeping bag, and water purification tablets. "I haven't." Elizabeth stood, her arthritic knees protesting. "At least wait until morning. Go with the search teams. So they can tell me where I can and can't look. No thanks." He found Dean's GPS unit and checked the batteries. "I'll start where they went missing and work outward. Different patterns than last time. If someone helped Rufus, there might be cabins or camps we missed." "Neil, please," Elizabeth said. "I can't lose you too." He paused, seeing the fear in her eyes. His expression softened. "You won't. I'll check in by satellite phone every 12 hours. But I have to do this, Mom. I can't just sit here while they write Dean off." Elizabeth recognized that determined look she'd seen it in her husband, in Dean, and now in Neil. There was no talking him out of it. "Be careful," she whispered. "I will." He hugged her briefly, then headed for the door. "Take care of Rufus. Maybe when he's stronger, he'll be able to show us something." "The police said the trail went cold," Elizabeth said. "Police followed one trail," Neil replied. "Rufus might have taken different routes over 2 years. There could be other signs." He shouldered the pack, rifle in hand. "I'll find something, Mom. Whatever happened out there, I'll find the truth." Elizabeth watched from the doorway as Neil loaded his truck, every movement sharp with purpose. She wanted to stop him, to keep her remaining son safe, but she understood his need to act. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. As the truck's taillights vanished into the gathering darkness, she closed the door and returned to Rufus's side. The dog's eyes were open now, watching her with an ancient sadness. "He's going to look for them," she told him unnecessarily. "Just like you did, I suppose." Rufus whined softly, his gaze shifting to the door as if he too was watching Neil leave. Elizabeth settled into her chair, one hand resting on the dog's head. Whatever secrets those woods held, she prayed they would finally give them up. The house felt too quiet with Neil gone. Elizabeth sat beside Rufus's bed, The only sounds the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the dog's labored breathing. It was past 10 p.m. now, the window's dark mirrors reflecting the warm lamplight of the living room. "Do you remember all those Sunday dinners?" she said softly. "You under the table, hoping for scraps. Joseline always snuck you pieces of roast when she thought I wasn't looking." Her voice caught. "I miss them so much. I keep wondering, will I ever see my boy again? Will he walk through that door like you did?" She knew she was being maudlin, talking to a dog about her fears, but who else was there? Neil was out in the dark woods, chasing shadows and hope. Her arthritis was too bad to call her sister in Florida, holding the phone that long would be agony. So she sat with Rufus, 2 survivors keeping vigil together. "The police think they're gone," she whispered. "They think you lived wild all this time, that Dean and Joseline had an accident. But you wouldn't leave him, would you? Not unless you had to, not unless he told you to go." A sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. Elizabeth's heart leaped. Neil must have changed his mind, decided to wait until morning. She pushed herself up, joints screaming, and shuffled to the front door. Through the peephole, she was surprised to see Officer Volkov, his uniform crisp despite the late hour, holding a manila folder. "Officer Volkov, it's rather late," Elizabeth said, opening the door partway. "I apologize." "Mrs. Spence," he said, looking genuinely apologetic. "I know it's after 10, but I've been going through old case files at the station, cross-referencing some of Dean's DEA work with missing persons reports from the last few years. I think I might have found something, a lead, possibly. There are some connections I'd like to show you, get your input on. I was going to wait until morning, but I saw your lights were still on, and I thought you'd want to know immediately if there was any new information." "Of course, yes, come in." The moment she opened the door wider, Rufus exploded into a frenzy of barking. Despite his weakened state, he struggled to his feet, lips pulled back in a snarl, his focus laser-sharp on Officer Volkov. "Rufus!" Elizabeth exclaimed, turning to the dog, shocked by the intensity of his reaction. "Stop that!" But Rufus continued, trying to lunge forward despite his injuries, his barking so loud it hurt her ears. "I'm so sorry," she said to Volkov, who had stepped back from the doorway. "I don't know what's gotten into him. Ever since he came back, he's been acting so strange." "It's all right," Volkov said, though Elizabeth noticed his hand lingered near his service weapon. "Trauma can change an animal's behavior significantly." "Let me put him in his crate," Elizabeth said. "Just give me a moment." It took considerable effort to get Rufus into the large wire crate in the corner of the living room. He fought her the whole way, something he'd never done before, and kept barking even after she latched the door. "Hush now," she said firmly. "That's enough. Officer Volkov is trying to help us." She returned to the front door, embarrassed and flustered. "I'm so sorry about that. Please come in. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "That would be wonderful. Thank you," Volkov said, stepping inside, his eyes scanning the living room. "It must be difficult being here alone with everything that's happened." "Neil was here earlier, but he's gone to search the woods himself," Elizabeth said, leading the way to the kitchen. "Couldn't wait for morning." She noted that Rufus's barking had shifted to a low, continuous growl. "He's convinced the police aren't doing enough." "Family often feels that way," Volkov said, following her. "It's natural to want to take action, to feel like you're doing something." "Yes, I suppose so," Elizabeth said. "Now you said you found some connections in old files." "I did some very interesting patterns that might explain." Elizabeth had just turned to ask him to sit at the kitchen table when she felt something soft press against her face. A sharp chemical smell hit her nostrils. A split second before she understood what was happening, a cloth over her mouth and nose. Chloroform, her mind supplied uselessly as she tried to struggle. But Volkov was stronger, younger, and had the element of surprise. One arm wrapped around her waist, pinning her against him, while the other kept the cloth firmly in place. Elizabeth's arthritic hands clawed weakly at his arm, but her vision was already darkening at the edges. "I'm sorry about this," she heard him say, his voice distant. "But your son made this necessary." Her legs gave out. The kitchen tilted sideways. Through the growing darkness, she heard Rufus going wild in his crate, barking, snarling, and throwing himself against the wire walls. "He tried to warn me," she thought muzzily. "He knew. He tried to tell me." The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Rufus's desperate barking and the sound of her body hitting the kitchen floor. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing a pounding headache and the taste of chemicals in her mouth. Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open to harsh fluorescent light and cold concrete. She was sitting on the floor, her back against something hard. When she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her. "Ah, you're awake," Officer Volkov said, standing a few feet away. He was no longer the helpful officer from before. His uniform was gone, replaced by dark civilian clothes, and the friendly mask had dropped, revealing cold calculation. In his blue eyes, "Why?" Elizabeth's voice croaked. "Why are you doing this?" "Because your son couldn't leave well enough alone," Volkov replied matter-of-factly. "He had to play hero. Had to send that damn dog for help." Elizabeth's mind struggled to process this. "You mean Dean is alive?" "For now," Volkov said, pulling out his phone and typing quickly. "Though that may change depending on how cooperative everyone decides to be." Two men entered through a metal door Elizabeth hadn't noticed. They were large, rough-looking, with faces that had seen violence and didn't mind it. They spoke rapidly to Volkov in Russian, their tone angry and aggressive. Volkov responded in the same language, gesturing toward Elizabeth. One of the men spat on the floor and said something that sounded like a curse. "Get her up," Volkov said in English. "Time for a family reunion." The men hauled Elizabeth to her feet, ignoring her gasp of pain as her arthritic joints screamed. Her shoulders burned as they half-dragged her through the warehouse. She tried to take in details: metal shelving, shipping containers, the smell of motor oil and rust. They were somewhere industrial, but she had no idea where. They passed through another door into a darker warehouse space, lit by only a few overhead bulbs. Volkov led them to a storage room walled off with plywood, forming a crude cell. He produced a key and unlocked a padlock on the door. "Your son has been our guest for quite some time, Mrs. Spence," he said. "I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you." The door swung open, and Elizabeth's knees nearly buckled. In the corner of the small room was a figure that barely resembled her son. Dean was skeletal, his once strong frame reduced to skin stretched over bones. His hair was long and matted, his beard unkempt. He was chained to a support pole, lying on a filthy mattress, his clothes mere rags. But it was his eyes that broke. Her heart, those familiar brown eyes, so like his father's, now hollow and haunted. One of the men kicked the pole hard, the metallic clang echoing. Dean jerked awake, instinctively curling into himself before he saw who stood before him. "Mom," he whispered, disbelief and horror warring on his gaunt face. "No, no, no." "Dean," Elizabeth tried to move toward him, but the men held her back. "You see what happens when you make foolish decisions," one of the men said in heavily accented English. "You send dog for help, now your mother pays price too." Dean struggled against his chains, his meager strength spent in the futile effort. "Please don't hurt her. She has nothing to do with this. I'll tell you whatever you want, give you whatever information." "You already gave us everything useful," Volkov interrupted. "Your mother is here because you couldn't just accept your situation. You had to try to be clever, sending that mutt away." "Please," Dean's voice broke. "She's 72 years old. She has arthritis. She needs medication." "You can't." "We can do whatever we want," the second man said. You should have thought of consequences before. Elizabeth found. Her voice. Dean, where's Joseline? The look on her son's face told her everything. His eyes filled with tears, and he shook his head slowly. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I'm so sorry, this is all my fault. Touching, Volkov said dryly. But we don't have time for reunions, come. They dragged Elizabeth out, Dean's desperate pleas following them. Mom, Mom! I'm sorry, don't hurt her, please. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The men spoke again in Russian, gesturing and arguing. Finally, Volkov nodded and turned. To Elizabeth. You'll be kept separately. Can't have you two plotting together. They took her to another part of the warehouse, to a shipping container modified into a makeshift cell. Inside was nothing but a pole fixed to the floor. Volkov secured her to it with zip ties, the position sending fire through her arthritic joints. Please, Elizabeth gasped. I need something to sit on properly, a mattress, a cushion, anything. My arthritis, not my problem, Volkov said coldly. Your son shouldn't have sent the dog for help if he cared about your comfort. How long? Elizabeth managed. How long have you had him? Volkov paused at the container door. 2 years, give or take. Your son has been very useful to our operations. D-intelligence is quite valuable in certain circles. You forced him to give you information, Elizabeth said. Forced is such an ugly word, Volkov replied. Let's say we provided proper motivation, first with his wife, then with the dog. He was much more cooperative after we showed him what happens to those who resist. The implications hit Elizabeth like a blow. Joseline was dead. They'd tortured Dean for 2 years, used his loved ones against him. You're a police officer, she said, though it sounded foolish even to her. I'm a businessman, Volkov corrected. Being a police officer just provides excellent cover and access. Now I have things to attend to. Try to get comfortable. Mrs. Spence, you'll be here for a while. Volkov was at the container door when he froze. The sound was unmistakable, multiple vehicles approaching fast, tires crunching on gravel. His hand flew to the radio on his belt, speaking rapidly in Russian, his voice tight with urgency. The response crackled back, panicked, the voice shouting. Even without understanding the language, Elizabeth could hear the fear through the containers. Thin walls, she heard car doors slamming, many of them. Then a voice she recognized, Detective Walsh, on a megaphone. This is the police. We have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Volkov spun back to Elizabeth, his face twisted with rage. He pulled out his service weapon, a Glock that looked impossibly large in the dim light. Your son brought this on you, he snarled, rushing to her. All of this is his fault. He cut the zip ties roughly with a knife, and Elizabeth cried out as her arthritic wrists screamed. He hauled her to her feet, spun her around, and pressed the gun to her temple. Move, he ordered, using her as a shield as he pushed her toward the container door. Outside, the warehouse had erupted into chaos. Elizabeth could hear the Russians shouting, the scrape of crates being pushed into defensive positions. Someone yelled orders in accented English. Volkov dragged her through the warehouse, keeping her body between him and the main entrance. Her legs shook, her joints on fire, but the gun at her head kept her moving. This is your last warning, Detective Walsh's voice boomed. Release any hostages and surrender peacefully. The response was a burst of automatic weapons fire from near the main entrance. The warehouse exploded into chaos, glass shattering, bullets punching through metal walls with sharp pings. SWAT is breaching, someone shouted. An explosion of flashbang grenade rang out, making Elizabeth's ears ring. More gunfire followed, the sharp crack of police weapons mixing with the deeper chatter of automatic rifles. Volkov cursed, pushing her faster through the maze of containers and shelving. They passed under a wooden support beam when a stray bullet struck it, showering them with splinters. Volkov ducked instinctively, his grip loosening for a moment. It was enough. Elizabeth wrenched herself sideways, her body screaming, but adrenaline gave her strength. She stumbled, fell, and rolled behind a forklift. "Damn it!" Volkov shouted. He glanced between her and his escape route, made a split-second decision, and ran down. Elizabeth lay gasping behind the forklift, splinters in her hair, her body shaking. The gunfire intensified. She heard officers shouting, "Move, move, move," and contact left. She had to get to Dean, fighting through the pain. She crawled across the concrete floor, her knees and hands bleeding from the rough surface. The plywood-walled cell wasn't far. She could see it through the chaos. More gunfire erupted. Near a back entrance, someone screamed in Russian. Glass crashed. Another flashbang went off, the concussion worsening her ringing ears. She reached the corner, crawled around it. The padlock was off from when they'd shown her Dean. She pushed the door open. Dean was there, trying to sit up on his filthy mattress, chains clanking. His hollow eyes widened when he saw her. "Mom!" "Get down," he whispered urgently. "Get behind something solid." Elizabeth crawled to him, staying low. More gunfire erupted closer now, mixed with SWAT's tactical commands. "Drop your weapons, hands behind your back." Russian voices yelled back defiantly. 3 quick gunshots rang out controlled police fire, followed by 2 more. Someone screamed in Russian, full of pain and fear, until another shot cut it short. Then, sudden silence, the kind that rings after chaos. Elizabeth reached Dean, her joints burning from the crawl. He stretched his skeletal arms toward her as far as the chains allowed. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "This is my fault. They took you because She, Elizabeth said, taking his face in her hands, feeling the sharp bones under papery skin. "None of this is your fault." Footsteps approached, multiple sets, tactical boots on concrete. "Police, anyone in here?" The voice was American, professional, urgent. "Here," Elizabeth called, her voice cracking. "We're here, we need help." Officers rushed in, weapons drawn but pointed low, sweeping the room professionally. "Them behind them, Mom." Neil pushed past, his hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. "Mom, oh God." He stopped short when he saw Dean clearly for the first time, his brother, the strong D agent who'd taught him to hunt, reduced to a skeletal figure chained like an animal. "Jesus Christ," Neil breathed. "Dean, it's safe now." Lead SWAT officer said, already on his radio. "Suspects are down or in custody. We need bolt cutters in here." Another officer shouted, "We need medics in here now. We have victims, one in critical condition." Neil dropped to his knees beside his brother, his face a mask of shock and rage. Dean managed a ghost of his old smile. "Hey, little brother, you look good." "Don't joke, man," Neil's voice cracked. "Not now, not after." Paramedics rushed in with equipment and a stretcher, immediately checking Dean's vitals and starting in 4. One produced bolt cutters and began working on the chains. As they freed him, Dean gripped Elizabeth's hand with what little strength he had, his eyes filling with tears. "They killed Joseline, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. 14 months ago, she tried to escape, and they shot her, made me watch. Said it was my fault for not cooperating fast enough." Elizabeth held his hand tighter, her own tears flowing. Neil made a sound like a wounded animal. "We've got to move him," a paramedic said. "He needs immediate medical attention." They lifted Dean onto the stretcher so carefully as he weighed almost nothing. Elizabeth struggled to her feet, Neil immediately there to support her. Together, they followed the stretcher out of that hellish room. The warehouse was a war zone. Bullet holes pocked the walls. Shell casings littered the floor. SWAT officers were everywhere, some clearing rooms, others guarding suspects. They emerged into the night air. When had it become night? How long had she been in that container? Police vehicles surrounded the area, their lights painting everything in reds and blues. Ambulances waited. 3 Russians knelt, hands zip-tied behind their backs, officers standing guard. 2 bodies lay under white sheets, blood seeping through. In the back of a patrol car sat Officer Dmitry Volkov, his face bloodied from being tackled during his escape attempt, Elizabeth would later learn. He stared straight ahead, avoiding everyone's eyes. "Ma'am, we need to check you out too," a paramedic said, approaching Elizabeth. But she couldn't look away from Dean as they loaded him into the ambulance. 2 years. Her son had been held in that warehouse for 2 years, just miles from home. The nightmare was over, but the healing had just begun. Elizabeth stood at the ICU's glass window, her palm pressed against the cool surface. She couldn't reconcile the skeletal figure in the hospital bed with her son. Dean had always been strong, 6 feet of trained muscle and confidence. The man in that bed looked like a concentration camp survivor. Double quotes Mrs. Spence. Dr. Kumar approached, his expression grave. "I wanted to update you on your son's condition." Neil joined them, his arm around his mother's shoulders. They'd both been checked and released. Elizabeth's injuries were minor, though her arthritis was flaring terribly from the stress and abuse. "He's severely malnourished," Dr. Kumar began, consulting his tablet. "His body weight is approximately 60% of what it should be. We're seeing signs of refeeding syndrome, so we have to be very careful with nutrition. Severe dehydration has damaged his kidneys. We're monitoring that closely. Will he?" Elizabeth couldn't finish. "He'll survive, but we're seeing infected wounds, particularly on his wrists and ankles from the chains. Muscle atrophy is severe. Even if he recovers, he'll need months of physical therapy to walk properly again." Elizabeth's joints screamed as she shifted, but she ignored them. Her pain was nothing compared to Dean's. "There are some people here who need to speak with him," Dr. Kumar added reluctantly. "FBI, they say it's urgent." Through the glass, Elizabeth watched 2 agents in dark suits enter Dean's room. They were gentle but urgent. Whatever Dean knew, it was critical. She and Neil were allowed in to support him during the interview. Dean's voice was barely a whisper, and he rested frequently, but his mind was sharp. The details he revealed chilled Elizabeth's blood. "The warehouse was a hub," Dean rasped. "Smuggling operation, drugs, weapons, people, sometimes. Route from Canada, using backroads, private property. They had Border Patrol on payroll." "How many officers were involved?" Agent Martinez asked, recording everything. "Saw maybe 12 different ones over 2 years," Dean said. Volkov was the main contact, but there were more. They talked about others. He closed his eyes, concentrating. "Badge numbers. I memorized badge numbers when I could see them." He recited a series of numbers. Martinez's partner was already on the phone, relaying the information. "The operation?" Martinez prompted gently. "Cartel money," Dean said. "Mexican cartel partnered with Russian mob, millions invested. They needed intel patrol schedules, planned raids, which routes we were watching." His skeletal hand clenched. "I held out for 3 months. Then they brought Joseline to my cell, said they'd hurt her if I didn't cooperate." Elizabeth squeezed his other hand, feeling the bones through papery skin. "I gave them outdated intel at first, stuff that wouldn't matter," Dean continued, tears leaking from his sunken eyes. "But they figured it out. 14 months. And Joseline fought back, grabbed a gun from one of them during feeding, almost made it to the door." His voice broke. "They shot her in front of me. Said it was my fault. Said if I just cooperated." Neil made a sound of pure rage. Dean couldn't continue for a moment. "After that, they used Rufus," he said. "Every time I hesitated, every time I tried to give false information, they'd hurt him. Burns, cuts, beatings. That wound on his head? That was from 2 weeks ago when I tried to refuse again." "But you got him out, Agent Martinez." said. Took me months to work it free, Dean said. Opening was too small for me, but Rufus could squeeze through. I knew he'd find his way home. He knows every trail between here and Mom's house. How did you convince them to bring the dog to you? Martinez asked. Told them I was dying, Dean said. That I'd give them everything, safe house locations, undercover agent identities, but only if I could say goodbye to my dog first. They believed me because I looked dead already. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Volkov always underestimated how smart Rufus is. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, Dean providing every detail he could recall. License plates, voices, names mentioned in passing. The FBI agents grew grimmer with each revelation. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a massive corruption case spanning multiple law enforcement agencies. Finally, Dr. Kumar intervened. He needs to rest. As the agents left, one turned back. Mr. Spence, we've already arrested 8 officers based on the raid. Your information will help us get the rest. You've saved a lot of lives. Dean closed his eyes. Couldn't save the one that mattered most. A knock at the door interrupted the heavy silence. Dr. Hernandez, the veterinarian, stood there with a familiar figure. I got special permission, she said softly. Someone wanted to see his dad. Rufus limped into the room, his tail wagging despite his injuries. The dog, too weak to stand properly hours ago, had found new strength. He approached the bed carefully, as if understanding Dean's fragility. Hey boy, Dean whispered, his skeletal hand reaching out. Rufus gently rested his head on the bed, positioned so Dean could touch him without straining, his eyes never leaving his master's face. Good boy, Dean breathed. Such a good boy. You did it. You got help. Both man and dog were crying. Dean's tears silent, Rufus's soft whines. The dog carefully placed one paw on the bed, maintaining contact. Agent Martinez appeared in the doorway again. Mrs. Spence, I thought you should know. We found remains at the warehouse, 3 bodies so far. Your son was right about the murders, and we expect more arrests within the hour. Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak. Justice was coming, but it couldn't bring back Joseline or undo 2 years of torture. As the room cleared, leaving just family, Neil moved closer to his brother's bed. Dad would be proud, he said quietly. You never gave up. You survived, and you got Rufus home. Dean's eyes found his brother's. I gave them information. People might have died because of what I told them. You were tortured for 2 years, Neil said firmly. You watched your wife murdered. You did what you had to do to survive. No one could blame you for that. Elizabeth thought of Joseline, vibrant, laughing Joseline who loved hiking and bad action movies, and looked at Dean like he hung the moon. Gone because of greed and corruption. The tears came again, silent and painful. I memorized everything, Dean whispered, his energy fading. Every face, every name, every detail for her. They're going to pay for what they did to her. Rest. Now, Elizabeth said, stroking his forehead around the IVs and monitors. Just rest, Dr. Kumar returned. He needs to sleep. You can stay, but please let him rest. The family settled in for their vigil. Neil in an uncomfortable chair. Elizabeth in a recliner a nurse had brought for her arthritic joints. Rufus curled on a blanket on the floor, positioned where he could see Dean, refusing to leave his post. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and Dean's breathing. Elizabeth settled back, prepared for the long vigil ahead. Her son was home, damaged, grieving, but home. They would face whatever came next together, the recovery, the trials, the long journey back from hell. For now, it was enough to sit in this sterile room and watch her son breathe. Each rise and fall of his chest was a small victory, a defiance of those who'd tried to break him. He'd survived. They'd survived. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something we should never forget, please like this story, Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow our journey for more stories that honor truth, dignity, and the power of standing tall even when the world looks away. Because when we remember together, we rise together. And that, at any age, is how change begins.